Good evening. This is Director Harrington, and I am calling the Civil Rights Board meeting to order at 7:01. We will now move on to roll call.
Thank you, Director. Jacob Beach.
Present.
Janine Brown.
Excused.
Marissa Harrington.
Present.
Madison Lukeman.
Present.
Dustin Cowan.
Present.
Sandra Calderon.
Present.
Stephanie Hoffman.
Present.
Commissioner Hoffman, I apologize.
It's okay. Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Director Green. May I please now entertain, this is Director Harrington speaking, may I please now entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting?
Motion to approve. No, you do mean minutes or agenda? Point of clarification?
May I please have a motion to adopt the agenda for today?
I move to adopt the agenda.
In support?
I second that.
Thank you. All those in favor of adopting the agenda, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. All right, thank you. Moving on to the approval of the minutes from the last meeting, may I please entertain a motion to accept the minutes from the last meeting?
Motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor of approving the minutes from the last meeting, please say
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
any opposed, say nay. All right, passed. Moving on to public announcements and communications.
Is there none?
Director, there are no public announcements.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to new business. We are going to do a hearing of a case. I'm going to ask Director Dustin if you can have a seat in the gallery, please. Okay. We have before us a complaint alleging a violation of Chapter 18A-2B of the Kalamazoo City Code of Ordinances. The complainant, Dustin Corwin, alleges respondent Berkshire Hathaway Property Management violated Section 18A-2B of the Kalamazoo City Ordinance by denying him housing based upon his past criminal convictions. The complaint was investigated by the City Attorney's Office, and their findings and recommendations were provided to the complainant and the respondent. Respondent was found to be in violation of the ordinance. The City Attorney's Office recommended a settlement agreement be reached between the parties whereby Mr. Corwin, upon filing a rental application and establishing that he qualifies for an apartment based upon legitimate conditions other than his criminal record, be offered for rental the next available apartment that meets his needs. The city provided updated policies and applications by the respondent that, to the city's satisfaction, clearly identify procedures that will comply with the requirements of Chapter 18A-2. The board has had an opportunity to review the complaint and the investigation report. We will ask if the complainant has anything additional to say, and then we will ask if the respondent has anything to add. Directors may ask clarifying questions to either party. At the conclusion of the hearing, the board will make a recommendation to the city manager. The complainant is a current director on the board, and we are committed to remaining impartial in this process. We note for the record, the investigation was concluded before he became a member of the board. So we will now proceed with the hearing. Mr. Corwin, we have had an opportunity to review your complaint and Is there anything further you would like us to know?
So I took an opportunity to look over the complaint, and the information does indeed seem valid and correct. But I was looking at the penalty or the consequence for this behavior, and it was just, I believe, some re-education. And to be honest, like, I wasn't given that as a citizen. When I violated the law in my second felony case, I have organized retail crime attempt. I had no idea that the law was recently passed. But yeah, I was still liable for that, and I still did a year in the county jail for that. So, I mean, when we talk about equality, that really stands out to me. Like, how are we supposed to say equality when we allow these types of behaviors without any consequences? I do remember in February of 2020, before the pandemic hit, Vice Mayor Patrice Griffin sat up here, right over here somewhere, and spoke about this policy. And I literally made a decision when I found out that I could have rights here to move to Kalamazoo. I changed my whole life because I saw an opportunity that my home community is not awarded. When I got out of prison, I went to Wendy's to get a job, and I couldn't even work at Wendy's. Clearly, that is not who I am. They didn't give me an opportunity to look. They looked past me, to look at a criminal record, look at maybe some rumors they heard. I don't know what they looked at, but they didn't look at me. So here I come to the city, and I was shocked. Like, nobody cares about you guys' rules. That's the fact of it is they found other ways to get around it too. I really don't want to say other ways, not this company. This company's only done this one event to me, but other companies. You know, and I don't really feel like comfortable saying it publicly because right now I think they got to win. Like, if they want to abuse people, they can find certain ways to still get around the rules. So yeah, I guess I'm just here hoping that you guys can see some value in me, you know, in protection. I don't know. I don't really know how to say it. I guess I'm a felon. I did it. I did every single crime and some. You know, realistically, I'm guilty of that and you know, plenty. But I'm a human. I'm a person. I have family. I have kids. I have friends. I have parents. I have sisters. Some of my friends. One friend in particular from up in the UP, he got out of prison last time and he died 4 days later because he overdosed. You know, really, I feel like my people are dying at faster rates than any other population here, and it's so hard because we can't even get an honest conversation, you know? So to me, I was not just denied an opportunity, I was denied my life. Because if I fail at this personal challenge of mine to overcome my negative behaviors, that is the consequence, is death, or I just go back to prison. It's all these things that I got to face, right? But this was done to me. And so I would just ask that somewhere along the line, somebody can find it in them to maybe pursue a little bit of penalty. You know, me as a citizen, I would be given that. So that's all I really have.
Thank you. I will now ask if the respondent has any additional remarks. The respondent present. Okay. We now, as a board,
Just for the record, could we note that the respondent is not present, so there is no ability to comment?
now, board, we will discuss a recommended resolution to the city manager. I do want to state what our options are for recommending a resolution. The first is to request further investigation into the complaint. The second is to determine no action is needed. The third is to determine a violation of the ordinance exists and propose either voluntary settlement agreement, use of mediation process, or refer to the city attorney for prosecution. Those are our options. We did have a recommendation from the city attorney's office that involves, in general, requesting that this management company update their policies and their application to the city's satisfaction that clearly identifies the procedures that will comply with the requirements of 18A, and will have to provide proof of that. So not only just their word that they did it, but they do have to provide proof of that. Also, upon Mr. Corwin filling out a rental application for this management company and establishing that he qualifies for the rental based on other legitimate conditions other than his criminal record, that he would be offered the next available apartment to meet his needs. So that those two things were the recommendation from the city's attorney's office for settlement. So I just wanted to open the floor to the board for further discussion, either of that recommendation and/or other alternative ramifications if that's the direction we decide to go in.
Okay, thank you. This is Director Calderon-Hueso. So I think I just need a little bit of clarification. What we're actually looking for here, or what we're able to make, is a recommendation on a resolution. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Mr. Corwin is looking for a different form of repercussion for the respondent. Okay, just to clarify what we are able to do versus what maybe is being asked.
Thank you. This is Director Harrington. I do want to clarify that we have our options that I read off in terms of resolution. We have a proposed resolution from those options from the city attorney's office, and the complainant is requesting possibly additional resolutions.
Just for clarification, those three resolutions are a voluntary settlement, which the terms Director Chair Harrington just discussed, the use of the mediation process, so using a third-party mediator to reach a resolution, or our final option is to refer to the city attorney's office for prosecution. So those are our three, the direction that we can go in this case.
May I ask a question of Mr. Corwin?
Yes, ma'am.
So the city is recommending that you are allowed to fill out a rental application with Berkshire
Correct.
Hathaway.
Yes.
Do you have any interest in doing that?
Absolutely not. I don't
Okay.
feel safe or comfortable. And I got mental health issues too that would definitely be a huge barrier to going and subjecting myself to that type of living conditions.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
Good evening, this is Commissioner Hoffman. Mr. Corwin, first let me say to you, you are not the action that you committed. You are not a felon. You are a human being who happened to commit what our judicial system calls a felony. So I would love to hear you refer to yourself as a man who made a choice, but that choice does not define who you are as a human being. So please know that. Do you have a permanent place to stay as of today?
I do. Actually, I've had some pretty positive experience with some realty agencies here, even to the point that the one I'm renting from right now did not ask for a cosigner this time. So it was, pretty big, I guess. I mean, I feel like that was huge for me.
Thank you so much.
So this is Director Beach. I just for the record, I don't, when you're looking at, for me, there is a clear violation of I would agree with the city manager's investigation that there's been a clear violation of the ordinance. And looking at the settlement, the recommended voluntary settlement, it is clear that the first option is not, when you look at a restorative settlement, does not restore anything of the harm that was done in this situation, because as Mr. Corwin said, he does not want to live there. He has a permanent residence now, so it is not as simple as just, I want to approve. This has taken some time to go through the investigation process. The other thing I would like to see is, and maybe asking for clarification, do we have to specify timelines in this settlement to allow us to know when things are going to be completed? Because it is, right now as this reads, they could turn new procedures or policies in 10 years from now and still be in compliance of this. So does that need to be spelled out when we're talking about this agreement, or is there standards already set in place?
That would need to be set out by this board, if that is part of your recommendation.
Any other questions, comments? Commissioner Hoffman?
This is Commissioner Hoffman. Do we have the ability to assess a dollar amount to try to repair harm that was caused in a financial way?
I'm sorry, do you mean directly to Mr. Corwin? No.
Yes.
The ordinance does not provide for that.
Any other questions or comments?
Since this is our first hearing that this board has heard, if I would appreciate if the city attorney's office could talk to what other potential conditions can this board enforce in this type of agreement? Because I do recognize there are limitations, and I want to make sure we can have a conversation on what is possible for us to enforce and do.
This is Director Calderon-Hueso. So with regards to the way that it is concluded, has been concluded right now, there's not even a fine attached to this, is what I'm understanding.
That's correct. That's what I'm upset about, to be honest.
I mean, because I feel like that would make an impact on property management companies.
This is Director Beach. I would agree. Is that something that we are able to do?
I'm sorry, no, it is not unless you pursue prosecution. And for clarification, in that instance, it would be a fine to the court, not to the complainant.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
I have a comment about what is shared publicly with the community with regards to what we are reviewing for the investigation, because I think that's also a good educational piece for the community. So we have the email messages that we see a blanket denial because of criminal history. And we have our investigation report. So I'm wondering what is shared for even just an educational piece if for whatever resolution we so choose.
These are all public documents at this point.
Have the floor, Chair. You good? Oh, great. This is Attorney Beach. I then, thank you for that clarification. I do think it is noted that the respondent is not present, and also in this investigation report still denied accountability for any wrongdoing. And I think that should be noted, and I think that the repercussions that are currently outlined in the settlement don't reflect that aspect of it. In a typical scenario, I might find myself, I'm struggling because the fact that we don't have any accountability, there's no an omission when we have evidence of a blanket denial. We have a blanket denial in writing. It's not interpretation. We have a blanket denial in writing. And then we have a respondent that has denied wrongdoing, based on our ordinance, and then is not present for the hearing about that complaint. And so I will say, unless I really do need some examples of other things that this board can enforce, because if not, I'm going to have, that will sway what I think my recommendation will be.
This is Director Harrington. I would just like to add that this is a first infraction. And I know that we, as a community, want to take a strong stance. I think also we need to understand that there's an education piece involved in this as well. And so what comes to mind for me right now is, yes, proof of their policies and their application process being changed with a date that they have to give it to us, right? I'm also wondering if we can, as a board, because we're tracking all of these complaints, can we have a first warning letter issued to this management company? Could that be something that we decide to do as a, hey, we're aware, we see you. This is our first, this is your first warning, right? That could get the message across, but also if there are further infractions in the future, as a board, we now can discuss, okay, now you've ignored the warning. We may need to move to stronger ramifications. So I just want to put that out there for thought and consideration.
This is Commissioner Hoffman. I also want to say that the respondent's inability to send representation speaks volumes. And this was just one courageous resident that was willing to come forward. And so how many others have been subjected to this treatment and just did not even broach it and took it with a grain of salt? So I want to put that narrative out there as well. This is just the first one who came forward and had the courage to do it. And this is a large property management company who makes millions within our community. And so more property management companies and homeowners and property owners are more well-versed than we believe because we had a lot of pushback when we were working on this. So this ordinance is nothing new to our community. So I'll leave that right there.
This is Director Calderon. I just have, I have questions. So, and being that this is the first one and I want to be piggybacking on the question that you had, Director Lukeman, about how much of this correspondence with regards to this is public. At this point, when a resident requests this hearing, everything to come from the hearing becomes public. So if there was, say, a letter sent, then that in fact would be public as well. Okay, thank you.
This is Director Beach. Mr. Cohen, I first want to thank you for coming forward. By doing so, your name becomes public record, and we are actively discussing your personal business. And I want to thank you for being courageous and sharing your story and coming forward so we can be the city we said we wanted to be, and that we have been taking actions to do so. I also want to thank you for your patience. I do think it needs to be noted that this complaint was filed in July 2021. I think when we talk about accountability, we have to hold ourselves accountable. So I want to thank you for your patience and with us, and as we learn a new process, and I hope we can build a better process so this doesn't happen again. With that in mind, I agree with Commissioner Hoffman that it speaks volumes I also agree that people do need an opportunity to make different choices and be a better person. And Mr. Corwin, I truly apologize that you were not given that same opportunity and respect by our judicial system. So I would like to see updated rental applications and procedures pretty quickly. I think within 30 days is more than generous. I also do think there needs to be an issue, and then I am curious, are we able to put in language of if after whatever date we select, we have complaints for the same infraction, our recommendation will be prosecution.
Each complaint would have to be addressed separately, but certainly your recommendation on a subsequent offense could include prosecution.
This is Madison Lukeman. To piggyback off what Director Beach is saying, I'm wondering if there's penalty for not responding to our request to change the rental application or the criteria that they're analyzing. You know, do we have the ability to say within, I think 30 days is really generous for how far away we are from when, you know, we've been having to comply with this. Certainly, I would have liked to see a change from this complaint in July. So, and they could have. I don't know. Frankly, I did go to the Berkshire Hathaway website to try to find, you know, how a consumer would apply for a rental property, and I could not do it. And I'm pretty well versed in that area. So I don't know how accessible they are. Not that they need to be accessible, but I think it would be important to have a ramification for a lack of response to our request. If we're going to say this is the first infraction, these are the requirements. If the requirements are not met, then the ramification is such and such.
The board can make that recommendation to the city manager.
This is Director Beach. What could those ramifications be? Is it the only ramification we really have is to prosecute and recommend that they rent to someone they've discriminated against?
According to the ordinance, yes.
This is Director Beach. We're going to move on to the ordinance revision in a minute. I will say if I am really struggling as a board member of how to hold anyone accountable, if my options are to, if my options are either to say like change and like hopefully do it, and if you don't do it, I guess someone will have to let us know and file a new complaint and come back, or I prosecute for a first infraction. Is just so for my clarity, is that what I have?
Yes.
This is Director Beach again. I will say, given the fact that the respondent has not taken accountability and has not taken the time to show up to the hearing, because I also have a lot of questions about has practices changed, have procedures changed, and the response to not show up, to give the courtesy, the respect to the ordinance, the respect to our community, speaks volumes, and my recommendation will be for prosecution.
Any other comments or questions?
This is Director Lukeman. I have to agree with Jacob in that I was prepared this evening with questions for Berkshire, and I'm surprised to see that no one is here representing, and that's extremely disappointing, because I think that if I could receive some answers from the defendant's side of it, that I might have more clarity, and I wouldn't maybe be leaning to prosecution, but I have the only information and the only side I have is Mr. Corwin, and thank you. But I think I'm going to have to agree with Jacob in that we pursue prosecution in whatever form that might mean, but I'm disappointed, really.
This is Director Calderon-Wisso. In the case that we make a referral for prosecution to the city attorney and it's denied, does the buck stop there?
The recommendation would not go to the city attorney's office. It would go to the city manager, and he would make the final decision, and it would be final.
Could they not accept the recommendation?
The city manager, yes.
And then that would eliminate any possibility of us being able to make further recommendations and for them to receive any repercussion?
The city manager can either accept the recommendations of the city attorney's office, the recommendation of this board, or take no action.
So even if we recommend a prosecute, sorry, this is Director B. Oh, there I go. So this city manager, even if we make the recommendation to prosecute, the city manager could still choose to go with the voluntary settlement that is outlined here.
That is correct.
So I'm just going to reiterate, we are going to be discussing reviewing the ordinance very soon. My recommendation would be to prosecute, and I would also recommend that the city attorney's office amends their recommendation to put pretty strict timelines in, because the city attorney's office currently has no timelines, which I find disappointing. So some pretty strict recommendations if in the case the city manager's office does decide to go with the attorney's recommendation. I do want to make sure it's enforceable and that we can, and I also want to make sure the recommendation has those new I want to make sure it's reported to the board when those are submitted and the date they are submitted.
Yeah, our office will provide you with an update.
This is Director Harrington. So what I'm hearing, and we will officially take a vote on this in a sec, but what I'm hearing is that we have a request for the recommendation that was made by the city attorney's office to include a deadline. The deadline that I heard was 30 days. And as a reminder, this would be a 30-day deadline to update their application and policies and procedures, so both, to be in line with the city ordinance in regards to past convictions. That's what I heard.
This is Director Beach. I initially made the 30-day timeline was my recommendation. I changed that recommendation to 14 days, which is 2 weeks, 10 business days if you want to get technical. I also have another question just about the investigation process, because a application and a procedure is just a piece of paper. Landlords have you can have a very pretty application and procedure about how you are going to do business, but we have a complaint that demonstrates how they do business. And so my question is, in the investigation process, is there any looking into whether this was an isolated incident or a standing practice with more people who are affected by it? Is that at any part of the investigation process? Do we look into that?
If we come across that information, we do, but it's difficult without people coming forward and knowing their names to solicit that information.
This is Director Harrington. So amending the recommendation and request to the city attorney's office to provide a 14-day deadline in their recommendation to the city manager. Are there any more questions or comments?
This is Director Loopman. I think that it is important to point out that, as we've stated, Berkshire Hathaway is a very large company. And I think that with any company, there are a lot of people involved, and there's a lot of processes, a lot of education that needs to happen. So I think that it's important to identify that maybe the person that is in this email was not properly educated on the ordinance. So I don't want to make a blanket statement about the practices of Berkshire Hathaway, certainly the property management arm of Berkshire Hathaway, but I think that it's important that we identify that this could be a secluded incident. We don't know that for sure, and try to give a little benefit of the doubt on that.
This is Director Harrington, and that reason is why I mentioned earlier my personal recommendation of a written warning. Because of the fact that property management companies, as we all know, there are many people that work there. There are people that are in and out. This was a year ago. Don't even know if this person still works there, right? This is also our first case. So this is the first example that we have in the community of this behavior. So sending a message with a letter that has very clear, if this happens again, that's establishing pattern. And we will be pursuing stronger ramifications and penalties if this happens again. That specifically is why I personally am leaning toward that. As someone who deals in the real estate industry and property management industry, people come in and out, people know better or were taught and don't do what they're supposed to do. And so I think a warning is a good step, but that's just my personal opinion.
This is Director Loopman. This was pushed up to their attorney, their local attorney. So I was anticipating maybe their local attorney would be here today.
This is Director Beach. I would agree with you, Chair Harrington, and I'm struggling with the fact that an attorney couldn't show up tonight and we could not hear from the respondent, because I do want to give the benefit of the doubt, and because we all know turnover, we all know training, we all know staff, we all know all of the things, and I can't make an informed decision, so I have to make a decision based on the information we are provided.
May I say something again real quick? So,
This is Director Harrington.
At this point, they're at the deliberation stage.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry,
No, that's
comments
fine,
are
that's fine.
concluded.
Thank you. I am going to ask for a recommendation formally from the board, and then we will vote on it, okay? So can I please have a recommendation from the floor, and then we can have someone support that recommendation, and we can provide additional discussion after it's seconded.
I motion that our recommendation to the city manager's office is prosecution. This is Director Beach.
Can I have a support? We need someone to support. We can vote it. Vote it down if you don't agree with it, but we do need a second.
This is Director Lukeman. I'll support.
Do we not have a second? Madison did, okay. Any more discussion?
This is Director Calderon-West. One more thing that I was wondering, I know that at some point we're going to have discussion around outreach about the ordinance and everything like that, but so it keeps coming to me that, you know, we're talking about people knowing and there was a big fuss about it and all this, but again, with turnover, we live in a college town and leasing agents can be younger people who may not have been around at the time that we were having these discussions. So in thinking about that, and also in education for people who need to be reminded, I mean, if you walk into most property management companies, you're going to find fair housing stickers and posters and things, you know, to remind people that these are the rules. I was hoping that that's something that could also be made part of either the recommendation or maybe brought into the discussion later, is around making, you know, some sort of visible poster, just for lack of a better word, available in the office to let folks know. Maybe that could even spark a question between the property management and the applicant around what that means, and making training mandatory for employees of property management personnel within well, hopefully for everybody at some point, but at least the areas that are to follow the city ordinance. Thank you.
This is Director Harrington. Attorney Jones, are we able to amend the motion within the vote?
Yes, if someone wants to amend and if the director who made the motion agrees.
This is Director Harrington. My suggestion for an amendment. This is my suggestion. I think that is a phenomenal idea because property management companies, real estate companies are required to post fair housing, equal opportunity. They are required to post that. They're not required to post our city ordinance. So we can make that a requirement for this company. And I think your second suggestion, what was your second suggestion again? I think that was great too.
To make training mandatory.
And mandatory training
Around
maybe for their main property managers, maybe not all the employees, because we're not really sure how many employees this property management company has, but maybe from the top. So whoever is their main property manager, leasing manager, maybe we make training mandatory.
This is Director Beach. I have a question before I answer your question. Could the attorney's office, what notices were sent out about the hearings to the respondent and defendant? What type of notices do they get prior to the hearing about information about dates, scheduling, and things like that? I don't know. Could you please clarify?
That would not have come from my office.
This is Director Green. I'm going to have Ms. Tanessa to explain that.
Thank you, Tanessa.
Not a problem. The notifications begin once the investigation has completed. From there, we send a letter to both the complainant and the respondent, along with the investigative findings, letting them know that both parties have the opportunity to request a hearing. From there, if either party requests a hearing, both parties will receive notification that a hearing has been requested. In this case, the hearing notification was sent out 2 weeks prior to this meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Director Beach, I just want to share, it is disappointing in practice how limited our abilities are as a board. I will say that, and it is challenging because we have had, as we mentioned, a large property management company make a choice not to be here. But I would agree that I think requiring posting of the ordinances, again, I'm all about timeframes in the next 7 days, within all of their City of Kalamazoo offices, or wherever they have leasing. And I do think proof of fair housing training for all property managers that serve the City of Kalamazoo. With that, plus updated procedures with 14 days. So I will update my motion, or is that something that is possible for us to do, attorneys?
As I understand it, your motion is to prosecute.
Yeah, and I'm saying if I want to change my motion.
You can withdraw your motion
So I'll withdraw my motion.
if the person who seconded, the director who seconded, is okay with the withdrawal.
Yes.
This is Director Beach. I will make a new motion to recommend amending the City Attorney's Office recommendation to require posting of Ordinance 18 and 18A in all rental offices within the city of that reside in the City of Kalamazoo, updated rental applications and policies and procedures within the next 14 days, and proof of fair housing training. And if the city is, and I would like that fair housing training to include the local ordinance that we contracted with the Fair Housing Center. I want that, I think it's important that training includes our local ordinance, and we ensure that occurs with all property managers within the Kalamazoo city that do business in the City of Kalamazoo in the next 90 days.
Excuse me, for a point of clarification, you are speaking of Berkshire Hathaway Management Company?
Yes.
This is Director Harrington. May I please have a second of that motion?
This is Director Lukman. May I amend this to include advertisement of rental properties? So not just, so I'd like it to include on advertisements of rental properties that the Chapter 18 ordinance is stated.
You agree?
I would agree, and I'd add that to my motion. So I will, do I have to reread it all again, or can I just add the last part? You got it? Great, thank you, Chair Harrington. But I would agree, yes, that is added to the motion.
I'm going to second that.
This is Commissioner Hoffman. Is there a space for comment at this time?
Yes.
So I feel compelled to cover a couple of things, and we're talking a lot about a lot of legalistic movements right now. Every management company knows that they need to have fair housing information posted. Now we're adding an ordinance, but it doesn't change the heart of men and women who are actually doing the work. And there was something mentioned about, property management employees change, so we know that's the case. So what happens when another case comes forward and there's another change within that organization? And I just want to put out here that this is not relegated just to this case. I receive at least one call a week where many property owners are doing just this very act to our community members. And so I don't want us to sit up here and, I wish I was a voting member. I really do. But I'll just give you all my conjecture. Families and individuals are still suffering, and we are in a housing crisis. So to do something legalistic and to say, well, if you post it, that is not going to change anything, how people think, how they act, and how they treat people of on their hierarchy of human value. And so, I don't want us to get caught up in the legalistic things, but what can we do? And I'll just put this out here, that when the community brought forth this ordinance, it was brought to Isaac from former Vice Mayor Patrice Griffin. And when she brought this forward to Isaac, we worked on it for over a year, and it had teeth to it. And there was a very strong enforcement piece to it. So what we're dealing with right now is not what was actually presented to City Hall. So I just want to put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have on the agenda to discuss revision of the ordinance. And so I would definitely like to chat about that during that conversation, because yes. As it stands for this motion, is there any more discussion before I call for the vote? Okay. All of those in favor of the board's recommendation to the city manager for Berkshire Hathaway Property Management Company to post the ordinance in their rental offices in Kalamazoo, to update their application and procedures and rental postings and advertisements to include the ordinance, and to provide proof of fair housing training, including our local ordinance that's covered for their Kalamazoo property managers within the next 90 days. Please say aye.
Aye. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't vote. I take it back.
I like your aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Please say nay. Any abstentions of anyone that's up here? All right, that motion passed. Thank you. We will now move on to, we will welcome Director Corwin back up to the, what is this called? Podium, place. Now to discuss the ordinance revision. So previously, in previous conversations, we have discussed very strongly the item of vouchers and how vouchers are treated in the ordinance or not. And so we have made some movement and some progress in regards to getting the ordinance updated to include that property managers, property management companies and owners cannot, I guess, discriminate against anyone if they have vouchers. Now, I feel like there's a new conversation, or an addition to this conversation, in regards to our power is a strong word, but I'm just going to use that word so we all understand what I'm saying. Our power as a board to enforce the ordinance, because it has to be in there for us to be able to enforce it. And I am, based on the conversation, the lengthy conversation that we just had in regards to the last hearing, I'm recommending that as a board, we need to examine that, because Commissioner Hoffman, there are some of us who weren't involved in the beginning stages of when the ordinance was being drafted, going through revision after revision. We weren't a part of that. So I personally was not even aware that there was more teeth to the ordinance than what we have right now. I was not aware of that. So I would like to open the floor to the board for discussion about this, because we have to also understand as a board that there is a process and procedure. I'm not going to say unfortunately, but there's a process and procedure in changing it. Now that it was passed, we have to go through a process. Attorney Jones, would you be able to spell out really quickly before we open up for discussion what that process is?
Certainly. The board can make recommendations on amendments to the current ordinance. Those recommendations would be placed in the ordinance. Our office would prefer or recommend that once proposed changes are included in the new ordinance, that there be another community forum to educate not only landlords, but tenants and the general community as well. Once a final draft ordinance has been created, that would go to the City Commission. The City Commission will have 2 readings of that. A first reading whereby the public would be able to make comments, and then a second reading in which they could either adopt or not adopt the ordinance.
Thank you. So I wanted to not only for our body, but for the public, I wanted to openly discuss that tonight. I want the public to know what the process is for us to revise the ordinance, that it is, as much as we would like it to be an instantaneous thing, it is not, so that it is fair and equitable. And we do have to adhere to that process. So I wanted to have that lifted up tonight as a part of this meeting. But again, I would like to open the floor to discuss any additional revisions, because if we're going through this process, let's just do it all. Not the whole thing. I don't want to revise the whole thing. But I just mean, like, if there's anything else that we feel like we are running up against in regards to the ordinance and our duty as officials on the Civil Rights Board, we need to get it all out now. So I will open the floor.
This is Director Beach. Attorney Jones, clarification. So if we, because it's my understanding, the teeth were taken away through revisions, and like the enforcement piece and some of those things were taken away through the revision process in order to get the ordinance through the process and by the recommendations of the city attorney's office. So if we as a board say we think it's important that this ordinance has an enforcement piece, is that something your office will then draft for us and then we can provide feedback, or is that something that we will have to present the language to the city, like to start the process?
Our office would draft proposed language, bring it before the body for consideration.
Thank you. That is one area I think we have talked about source of income. Living the process that is on paper was just very eye-opening in our abilities as a board. So I think those 2 things, and since we're at it, we have had a lot of discussion about our name as a civil rights board and if it was the appropriate name for what we do. So I would recommend, because that is a whole discussion, that we put that on the agenda for our September meeting. We're meeting in September, correct? Yes. Our September meeting, we put our name so we can have that discussion. That, I think those are the things where we should start.
This is Commissioner Hoffman. So I just want to put out here to the dais that the entire purpose of the CRB was to enforce. It was not to be a proxy committee. It was to be an enforcement piece to the ordinance. So I just want to put that out there to you all and to the community as well. We were not up here just to check a box. We were up here to do some things and change a system that is flawed and antiquated and no longer serves this community's highest good as it pertains to people that are low income, no income, BIPOC.
This is Director Beach. Attorney Jones, how long, so I would like to make the request on record for the city attorney's office to draft an enforcement component of this ordinance to present to the board. I don't know how long that will take for your office or what that timeline is, so if you could shed insight to what that might look like for your office.
I believe the ordinance does have enforcement provisions provided. If you have additional recommendations, you certainly can present those to our office.
This is Director Loopman. I think maybe what you're looking for is the ability to maybe send out that first notification of warning and maybe having like a fee schedule for infractions? Is that, I
Sure,
got
let's
that
start
from.
there.
Okay.
Let's start there. This is Director Beach, as a board member, I will say I don't feel I enforced much today. I don't feel, I'll just say that. And I think some sort of fee structure, things like that is important. Or, yeah, of some sort.
The board is not able to enforce fees.
So the ordinance could not outline that ability.
No.
As Director Corwin, could the board direct mediation in court or any type of court action outside of prosecution by the city attorney's office, but mediation in court of law?
It certainly can recommend mediation, but it cannot force it.
Correct, yeah.
This is Director Beach. Attorney Jones, what can we enforce? Or recommend, or what can we recommend for, because we can't do fees, which I understand we can't do fees. We can't do any other court things. What other things can we do?
I guess I would ask what you would like to do.
This is Director Harrington. I just need clarification before I answer that question. If we were tonight to recommend prosecution, what does that mean?
Our office would charge Berkshire Hathaway Property Management with violation of the ordinance. The matter would proceed to court, and there would be a hearing. If they were found responsible, there would be a fine, as outlined in the chapter.
This is Attorney Beach, point of clarification. That is only if the city manager says yes, correct?
The final decision does rest with the city manager's office.
So even, I want to be really clear, so even if at our hearing today, we would have recommended, based on our ordinance, if I think we would have recommended prosecution and the city manager's office said no, then there's nothing. So I guess when I'm looking at, because there's no repercussion, so I know my question now. I got there. So is there do we have the ability to enforce if they do not, so say the recommendations we made tonight for the first hearing are not adhered to, could we amend the ordinance to then, if they do not adhere to recommendations, the complaint, we could then pursue prosecution if they don't adhere to the recommendation? That we may do that? Could that be outlined in the ordinance?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you. I would like language for that, please.
This is Director Corwin. I really don't have a question for anybody, but just a real comment, to be honest. So some of these companies are speaking a language that we today just didn't speak. They're speaking the language of money, and in today's world, words on a paper really don't mean anything to these people. And a citizen who is struggling with mental health issues, whatever the reason, there's a million reasons why people find themselves in these situations. But if they're struggling with these issues and we're hurting them as a community or not protecting them, whose fault? And again, the criminal code will be taken care of directly. So we are not practicing equality if we're telling businesses, it's okay. We'll just write you a little love letter. Everything's good, you know, don't hurt our community. Yeah, right. They turn people down for money, so we have to speak in the same language. If I'm speaking to somebody in English and they only know Japanese, whose fault is it? It's my fault. I need to figure it out. That's all I say.
This is Director Beach. Commissioner Hoffman, in the original ordinance, was the city manager the final decision maker?
No.
So could we make a recommendation to change the ordinance that had us as a board as the as the final decision maker? Attorney Jones, would that be a recommendation that we could make as a change?
You can make that recommendation, yes.
Again, this is Commissioner Hoffman. That was the entire rationale behind creating the Civil Rights Board, is that the board itself would have authority and power to determine without it going further.
This is Director Lukeman. I want to go back to your comment, Director Corwin. In monetary, thinking monetarily, I'm feeling as though if a complaint is here at a hearing with this board, that it might be necessary for the ordinance to include some language, at the very least, about returning application fees to those folks that have made complaints. We have found through the investigation process that that company had violated the ordinance. I feel like at the very least, maybe the attorney's office could make a change to the language that might be a minimum, requirement that this person, the applicant, can receive their application fee back. Now, there is language about receiving application fees back for those whose housing becomes unavailable to them, but there isn't any language about returning application fees if the company is in violation of the ordinance. This is very small dollars, if you will, but it's something.
Is that something we can enforce, Attorney Jones? Recommend?
I believe so, but it's something I would have to look into before I make a statement.
This is Director Beach. In terms of, is there ability for us to make repercussion or recommend repercussions for those who do not show up to their hearing? So if a respondent does not, if a respondent, correct? Yeah, if the respondent does not appear at a scheduled hearing, that the recommendation will be prosecution? Like that is the default if they do not appear at their hearing?
No.
Could you help me understand why that is?
Your recommendation would have to be based upon the complaint, not any action that they've taken, whether they appear or not, but whether in fact they did violate the ordinance that you had before you.
I have a question then. This is Commissioner Hoffman. Then when we think about a person getting a subpoena and they do not show up to court, then the potential of them receiving a warrant is made a priority. So I'm saying, like, if this is a legitimate board and it is the residents of the city of Kalamazoo voted that we want this, I'm a little confused by the weight of it, I guess.
A subpoena is a legal document. from a court that can enforce it. This body does not have subpoena power to force anyone to appear, and it's not criminal in nature. The violation would not be criminal in nature.
This is Commissioner Hoffman then. So we just decriminalized some things that will become an infraction within the city of Kalamazoo. So what happened, could we consider this something as in the same sense of an infraction and proceed to the next level?
In civil infraction cases, if a person doesn't appear, then there is a default entered, and they are found responsible by default.
Boom. Is that,
Again,
that's not possible?
no, it's not possible in this case because they have not been charged with a civil offense.
Oh, we got work to do.
This is Director Corwin. At this moment, honestly, I feel like we're just lying to our citizens. Like, these are our people struggling, and we are just lying to them openly. Like, hey, come, we'll protect you, we'll get you back, we'll help, and then it just doesn't happen. And I understand the power complex, or the power struggles in this are insane, but again, from the citizen's point of view, it doesn't matter if this is a board, whatever, this is a state. The state's functioning, and when state functions, citizen doesn't get protected. That's what the citizen would experience. But if the citizen dysfunctions, the state will correct. As a matter of fact, the state will be there within minutes, and as a matter of fact, this particular case is well over a year old. So if I went to Walmart in today's nature, I would be held at a higher set of standards than business. I understand the difference in criminal, civil, and all those things, but I'm just saying that's what it says to a citizen from their point of view, uneducated, a layman's point of view, that's what they see. We are failing and we're lying to them. We're doing more damage unless we can find some route of enforcement. These people have been hurt for way too long, and we lie, and that's just more pain and trauma.
This is Director Harrington. I do want us to focus on the fact that the topic at hand that we're discussing is figuring out how, as a board, we can do things. Legally, there are things that we just cannot do, and so I want us to just encourage ourselves in that there are things that we can do, though. And I want us to explore the things that we can do that will have teeth, that will send a message, because that's really what we're talking about right now. People have been going unchecked up until now. They've been going unchecked. So what can we do to make sure that we're sending the messages that we need to send? In regards to the timeliness of the investigation period, we've already discussed that, right? So that should be getting better. We should not be hearing cases this time next year from August of 2022. So I just want to say that as well, publicly, is that part of the process as well should be getting better. But it's all about oversight, it's all about education. And I think this body specifically that's here right now has a better handle on that than previously. So I want us to focus on what can we do? And with the current ordinance, what can we do, what can we add so that we can go through this process of making these revisions so that they can go through the, approval process. What I have currently is recommendations in regards to if you don't adhere to what was recommended after a hearing, the board can go back and amend that. What I have is that we would like to suggest that the Civil Rights Board have the final decision-making power, and that we at least, it sounds like Attorney Jones is going to look into if we can at least request that if a respondent, in this case a landlord or owner, is found in violation of the ordinance, that they at least return the application fee that was submitted by the claimant. That's what I have so far.
Point of clarification, I think we could not be the final decision maker. I thought, correct, that was a no, or can we recommend that? Oh, we could, nope, I remember, we can recommend that. I remember the we can recommend, sorry.
This is Director Lukeman. I'm unsure if this is needing to be inside of the ordinance, but I think that it's really important that we ask for more directive on notifications to the complainants and the respondents. Anything that is important to me comes to me with certified mail that I have to sign for, and I know I need to show up for, whatever that is, or pay a bill. And maybe including email notification into that. So I understand we mailed the notice of the hearing, but I think going back to, all of these ways that we can communicate with everyone, I think it's important that we check those boxes. So again, I don't know if that needs to be added into the ordinance itself, but I'd like to comment about the process. On that same note, I'd also, thinking back to the flow chart, I'd also like to notify the complainant if we refer the complaint out to a different agency. I think that's really important that they know, here is now the point of contact for this complaint.
This is Director Beach, I would just echo the certified mail, and I do think it needs to be spelled out in the ordinance. I think we have learned that what is written is what that is what we have to follow, and interpretation. I think there has already been some misinterpretation, understanding, so I think we should spell as much out as we can. Tanessa, did you have something?
Yes. Thank you.
Everyone know that there were some questions in regards to how we're notifying people, what we're telling them. The mail portion, per our investigative manual, it is spelled out that we are sending that first-class mail, which is what has been done from this. Since the beginning, we've been sending out notifications. So that's what's being done. If I know certified mail was just brought up, so I guess that's another piece that can be in question. So thought I'd clarify that and give you that information. And then also with the notification, if a complaint comes in and it's not something that comes to the board, or if it's something that a city department can handle, or if it's going to, whether it be the Michigan Department of Civil Rights or the Fair Housing Center, they are notified. Not only are they notified where it's going, they are given contact information on how to get in contact with them and how long it will be before someone should be getting in contact with them. So I just want to make that very clear that that communication is sent out and they are notified.
This is Director Lukeman. Thank you.
Welcome.
I think that should be added to the flow chart. Yes.
This is Director Beach. Tanessa, thank you. That also reminded me, I think in the ordinance, since we're going to be talking about revising it, I do think we need to talk about accountability for us as a board in a city. So I would also like to open up, and we do not have to have a full discussion tonight if we want to push it, but putting clear time frames in our ordinance to hold us accountable to. Because I think that's what we're really talking about. We're talking about accountability across the board. We want to make sure our citizens that our landlords, our business owners, the members of our community are accountable to what we say is important to us as a community, that the city is accountable to protecting the citizens of Kalamazoo, and so we as a board look at this ordinance, interpret and enforce it in a way that is equitable as in the intent in which it was created. So I would like to add that to the September agenda, Chair Harrington.
This is Director Harrington. Attorney Jones, can you provide some insight and clarification? Because to my understanding, there are timelines in the ordinance currently. They just have not been adhered to.
I do know they're in the investigative manual.
I don't think they're in the ordinance. I think they're in the
I thought there were timelines in the ordinance that I read. No, if I'm wrong, let me know, but.
She has it right here.
I thought I saw some sort of timeline because I remember going, we're not following that. Or maybe it was the investigative process, but I just want to clarify before we make a recommendation.
This is in the enforcement. Action on the complaint will be completed within 91 days of receipt of the complaint, and the parties will be notified in writing if additional time is necessary.
This is Director Green. After the 91 days, then the D&I coordinator will share within 5 business days of that.
Thank you for that clarification, because I remember that specifically because of the fact that I realized we weren't following the timeline after reading it. So we do have a timeline in this ordinance. We just have to follow it. Not we, but you know what I mean.
This is Director Green. Just to add the last part to it is that the complainant or respondent requests a hearing within 10 days.
This is Director Corwin. Is there any way we can revise the 10-day to be more specific and state like 10 business days, as Director Beach had stated for earlier policy, or 14 days from, I don't know, some type of understanding what the 10 days are?
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, it is 10 business days.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, so are there any more additional recommendations that we want to lift up? Also, we could add this as an agenda item again for next month's meeting, which is the first week in September 7th. I think that's the day we're meeting. And we can discuss again. So maybe we can have some time to marinate on this. And if there are additional recommendations that all of us come up with from reviewing the ordinance again, that's what my request is going to be as a chair, is if you all can go through the ordinance with a fine-tooth comb and come prepared with recommendations that we discuss at our September meeting. But just an FYI that will push our process out a little bit, right? Because we were already told what the process is. So the longer that we take to make recommendations, and I think we should take our time, and I think we should be thorough about it. I just want to say publicly that the revision process will just be delayed the more that we discuss.
So this is Director Beach. I would recommend it's also on the agenda. I would also ask that if Attorney Jones, you could send out to the board a pretty explicit list of just overview of what we can recommend or what we cannot, just the list of what we cannot recommend, so we can come informed of what our abilities might be. I would appreciate that.
This is Director Lukeman. At the beginning of this discussion, Director Beach mentioned the naming of the board, and it sounds like that, I think that was something that happened before I came into the board, but I wanted to make sure that that gets on a list somewhere. You got it. Okay.
I also would like, and Attorney Jones, with the recommendations we just came up with tonight, and we can go through that list or provide that list, if we could have an update on the status of those drafts if we do not have them by our September meeting, because I realize it's going to take time and work. But at the September meeting, an update on what the recommendations of changes we have talked about tonight, so we don't, the process is a long process, and if we have more recommendations, it's more drafting, it's more, so I want to make sure the ball is slowly moving.
This is Commissioner Hoffman, and I would be remiss if I did not mention that what we're talking about is making huge amendments and changes to an ordinance that we fought very hard to get to this point. And what that means is that there is going to be a lot of scrutiny and a lot of community engagement and naysayers and all these things. So what we're talking about doing is not going to be easy, and it is not going to be popular. So get ready for a fight as a board, right? Because it is going to be a fight. And so just to think that we can make these recommendations and the community will not have anything to say or they're going to be on board, it's a fallacy. So I just wanted to put that out there in the universe.
Okay, if there is nothing further on that agenda item, I just wanted to quickly move on to the next agenda item, which is a board member application interview process update. Director Beach, do you want to speak to that?
I would love to speak to that. We have a number of new applications that have been sent to myself, Director Lukeman, and Director Brown, who we decided was going to be the nominating committee. We are getting availability and hopefully going to schedule interviews out the next 2 weeks, and then have a recommendation ideally for the board at the September meeting for new board members is the goal.
Thank you. All right, moving on to citizen comments.
There is no phone calls.
There are no citizen comments, Director.
Okay, moving on to miscellaneous comments by board members. I know we've chatted a lot tonight, but is there anything additional that anyone would like to add before we adjourn?
This is Director Lukeman. I think that we have discussed a lot about education into the community, and there have been trainings scheduled at Fair Housing Center. I think that it might be, I don't know if we can do this, but it might be important to see who attends these meetings or who or what companies attend, and try to identify, if there has been training provided to the company or to the person or to the landlord or to the employer, whatever that might mean, because that will allow us to understand if the community is, putting forth the effort to try to understand the ordinance as well. So I don't know if that's something it might be personal data that we aren't able to retrieve, but I just want to put that out there as our piece as we're trying to make decisions about companies and people and, not adhering to ordinances.
Any other additional comments?
I just want to congratulate my fellow board members for hearing our first civil rights case and complaint. For me, it was a learning experience. We have a lot of work to do, but it was great discussion. It was great. It's great to sit on a board with people who are so committed to this work, even with it's hard and trying to navigate how to make impact within systems, which is hard. So it's, I just want to congratulate my fellow board members and thank them for their time.
Okay, if there is nothing further, We are going to adjourn this meeting at 8:30 on the dot. Thank you.